Hello and welcome. Thank you for coming in such great numbers. It's fantastic. It's always wonderful to stand in front of a Brooksby audience. A Brooksby audience is the best audience. Are you ready? Yes. Okay, here we go. My name is Arlene Mednick, also known as the Chair of Concerned Citizens. Last month, I left you with 2 words. Actually, one name, Frank Huntington. We're in a very special afternoon. I can't wait to hear what he says today. Remember, if you know of a speaker or want to hear a speaker on any subject, please let us know. Just tell me or one of my board members. Concerned Citizens is always pleased to be able to bring to you speakers on very important issues. Just a reminder, right now, turn off your cell phones. Don't just silence them. Turn them off now, please. And during our question and answer period, wait for a microphone to be brought to you. Speak strongly into the top of the mic. I don't want to take the speaker's time, so I'll introduce the board member who has been in charge of the speaker arrangements for today, Neil Gillis. Yay, Neil.
Good afternoon, Brooksby. Concerned Citizens, thanks you for coming this afternoon. We have another full house. Again, please turn off or mute your cell phones. My wife and I arrived in Brooksby in May of 2021. And in early September, I noticed from somewhere that there was a speaker going to be speaking in the chapel concerning American history. I thought, oh, that sounds good. And I went to the chapel and I saw a gentleman by the name of Frank Huntington who was giving a live and learn lecture. And I can't remember the exact topic, but it would be American history. I arrived a few minutes before the start time and found the chapel almost completely filled. Being new, to me, that was a good sign it was going to be good. When Mr. Huntington started his presentation, I was pleasantly surprised at how smooth he was in his delivery. He seemed to really know his material. This guy must have been a retired college professor. Little did I know. That 1 hour exposure to Mr. Huntington in the fall of 2021 made me an instant fan. In fact, you will see me attending his presentation day after tomorrow in the chapel. And it is, again, a live and learn series on the 1960s. Let us all welcome our speaker today, Mr. Frank Huntington, a Brooksby treasure.
Good afternoon. There are a heck of a lot of you here, and frankly, this is a bit terrifying. I want to thank the Concerned Citizens for the invitation. My wife Amanda and I live across town at Thorndike Gardens. I've been here coming up on 5 years now, and I have a PhD in history. The job market was bad. I panicked and did the only sensible thing and went to law school. So I was actually a lawyer for a long time, but I am truly a frustrated college professor. And somehow there's people here who are willing to listen to me, and it's a delight for me. I really appreciate it. So my topic today is the first year of Donald Trump round 2. I am an old-fashioned liberal Democrat, otherwise known as a dinosaur. If Franklin, which is my full name, if Franklin had not been a family name anyway, my parents might have named me for Franklin Roosevelt. So I will confess that there's a lot of things that are currently happening that get me really upset. And I mean, that, it's a long list, including, the current president's attempts to pretend that racism is not still a problem in this country. It's like just somehow, everything's fine. We don't have to worry about that anymore. But what I want to talk about today is not just all the things that tick me off, because, we can all watch the news and either cheer for what's happening or get upset at what's happening. But I want to talk about the ways in which the current president is a threat, to, as far as I can tell, to our democratic system of government. Now, one way to prove that point would just be to quote the guy. I mean, you could quote, and there are websites devoted to every word he says. And if you want to read every word he says, it's out there. And if I could quote some of the president himself, or I could quote some of the scary people who work for him, or the Project 2025 playbook that they seem to be, to some extent, following. But what I'd rather focus on is what he's been actually doing, and the things about what he is doing that, to me, present a threat to our actual system. Not just political things I disagree with, but something more dangerous than that. So, if let's stop working. There we are. So, dictators. The 20th century presents a few examples of some fairly successful dictators who undermined a democratic system of government in their country from the inside. What do you do? How did they go about it? And one of the things those dictators did was, in a variety of ways, try to manipulate public opinion and build support for their policies in certain distinctive ways. I mean, every politician wants to build support, but the way, and that sounds like a phone. Let's try to turn our phones off. What do? If you direct public attention and hostility on marginal groups in the society, you find victims and you turn them into threats. You undermine and intimidate your political opponents and anybody who might be criticizing you. You conceal or you manipulate information. And you build a cult of personality around the leader himself. That's one category, manipulating public opinion. What else do you do if you're a dictator trying to undermine a democratic system? You neutralize your opponents. You eliminate opposition from within the government itself. You put your opponents in jail. You rig elections. And you outlaw opposition political parties. What else do you do? The dictators that I threw up on the screen there a minute ago governed basically by doing what they wanted, either with a legislature that rubber stamped everything they did, or by using emergency powers that allowed them to simply ignore the legislature and do what they wanted. And bottom line, what backs up dictatorship? People with guns, right? People with guns. Now, clearly, I am not saying that Donald Trump is one of those dictators yet, but darn, to one degree or another, every one of these things I rattled off is stuff he's been doing. So let's walk through some of them. And I really, although I confess my political bias here, I'm really trying to stick to the facts and what has he actually been doing. And it's amazing how much you can find on the internet if you want to keep track. Okay, so, as I said, mobilizing public opinion, you need to give people an enemy. We all know who Donald Trump's primary enemy is. People in this country who he claims do not have the proper legal paperwork. Now, rather than recognizing that most of those immigrants without the right papers are just hardworking, ordinary people who take jobs that nobody else wants, right? He turns them into criminals, drug dealers, people who threaten our way of life. Illegal immigrants have become a threat in his world. Now, there's something called the Cato Institute. A few of you may have heard of it. It's a libertarian organization. It's not left-wing. It's a kind of conservative libertarian organization The Cato Institute studied this and concluded that illegal immigrants are much less likely to commit crimes in this country than the rest of us. Reality doesn't matter in this world, unfortunately. And so the focus on immigrants is a classic tactic of directing public fear and public anger on marginalized folks who cannot fight back because they don't have enough political power. Is it any coincidence that the illegal immigrants are not ordinary white Protestants? I don't think so. I don't think so. So, according to the Department of Homeland Security, if they have a website, they are proud to tell you that they have deported 500,000 illegal immigrants, and they claim that another 1.6 million immigrants have, quote, self-deported, which I guess means just leaving on their own. They haven't offered any evidence for those figures, but those are, if those numbers are anything close, that's pretty impressive. But Trump is doing a lot more than just deporting people, primarily Hispanic people, who are in this country without the right paperwork. He has invoked something called, it got there before I pointed. That's interesting. The Alien Enemies Act. That's a sort of historical trivia question for you. That goes back a long ways. And what it basically says is, if the United States has declared war on somebody, or if we've been invaded, then citizens of that hostile nation can be rounded up and kicked out. Trump relied on that law to deport members of a criminal organization that's based in Venezuela. That's at least what he claimed he was doing. So far, they've deported at least 100 people under that rubric. 75% of the people they deported, and they're sending them to a prison in El Salvador that no one would want to go to. 75% of them had no criminal record at all. Some of the people that got rounded up were deported by mistake. A federal appeals court has said that Trump can't use that. And, have we declared war on anybody? No. Have we been invaded by a foreign country? No. So, appeals court says he can't do it. Of course, he's appealed to the Supreme Court. But he's done more than just target people who are in this country illegally. He is targeting people who are American citizens. What's called birthright citizenship. What does that mean? The 14th Amendment, which was passed right after the Civil War, is very clear. Anybody born in this country and living here is a citizen of this country and a citizen of the state where they reside. It was designed to overrule a Supreme Court decision right before the Civil War, which said that even though they were born here, Black people could, by definition, not be U.S. citizens. So after the Civil War, Congress wanted to get rid of that Supreme Court decision and pass it. That's a pretty simple sentence, right? Not to Trump. Trump says that even though it seems clear, they never intended it to apply to the children of people who are in this country illegally. Several federal courts have issued injunctions against his enforcing that, because he said is the federal government is no longer going to treat those children as American citizens. Several federal courts have said no, the amendment doesn't say that, you can't do it. Naturally, Trump has appealed those decisions to the Supreme Court. But he's got another group of victims, and this one baffles the heck out of me. People who are transgender. Now, think about it. I really get upset about this because one of my daughters is transgender. She was, given at birth the wrong body, you might say, and it took her 30 years to realize who she really was and what her identity really was. And she's been getting medical help for that for the last number of years. Trump has said, he's basically declared that my daughter's an illegal, that the government is no longer, government IDs, you can only have the gender you were assigned at birth. My daughter's passport is now invalid. He discharged dishonorably from the U.S. military every transgender person. He has ordered that transgender women and girls can't participate in school sports teams. He's ended federal insurance coverage for the hormone therapy that, as it applies to federal employees, the kind of therapy my daughter is getting. And I mean, do transgender women using women's restrooms really constitute a threat to American society? I mean, I don't get where this hatred comes from, but it's another really disturbing example of targeting people who can't fight back very well. Now, the second thing, as I mentioned, that dictators like to do is to try to intimidate people who might oppose them. And Trump has been doing that on several levels. He's gone after many of the nation's most prominent universities. The one in our backyard, of course, is Harvard. The stated rationale that he and his supporters have sometimes used is that the universities didn't do a good enough job of protecting Jewish students during the pro-Palestinian protests a couple of years ago. But the real, let's face it, the real concern is that universities teach liberal values that Trump doesn't believe in. And so they are committed to diversity and equity and inclusion programs, DEI, that Trump disagrees with. He has a lot of leverage against universities like Harvard. He can threaten to withhold billions of dollars in research funds from the federal government. I found somewhere that Harvard gets $700 million from the federal government every year. He can threaten to block the attendance of international students. He can threaten to pull the university's tax-exempt status. Several universities have cut deals with him, and they have agreed to eliminate their diversity programs. Other universities have fought back. A federal judge in Boston has ruled that Trump cannot prevent international students from coming to Harvard, and that Trump can't withhold research funds from Harvard. And the judge also ruled that the references to anti-Semitism are, quote, a smokescreen for targeted, ideologically motivated assault on the university. Basically, the anti-Semitism is a rationalization. They're really targeting what universities stand for in this country. Naturally, Trump has appealed all of those orders because a few other universities have gotten similar orders in their favor. He's been going after law firms. Lots of big law firms that represented his political opponents, law firms that hired attorneys who formerly prosecuted him. He has issued orders that, and this is just an example of some of the law firms that he's gone after. And those, if you know anything about the legal community, those are big names. He's prohibited lawyers from those firms from working for the U.S. government. He's even prevented them from entering federal courthouses, claiming that the lawyers are a security risk. It's hard to practice law as a litigator if you can't get into the federal courthouse. That's a fairly effective tactic. Some of the firms have settled with him and agreed to drop their diversity programs. They've agreed to devote millions of dollars of pro bono time to conservative causes. Other firms have fought back. Several courts have ruled that Trump's targeting the law firms was penalizing them for exercising their First Amendment rights. Naturally, Trump has appealed those rulings. And he's gone after the liberal media. A couple of the more high-profile examples. In July, Paramount needed FCC approval for a merger. Trump shook them down. Paramount agreed to pay $16 million to Trump's presidential library in order to settle a frivolous lawsuit in which he claimed that when they interviewed Kamala Harris on 60 Minutes, it somehow harmed him. He refused to be interviewed, but nevertheless. So Paramount threw money at the presidential library to settle the silly lawsuit, and then a couple weeks later, they got rid of Stephen Colbert's show. Was it a coincidence that he made fun of Trump every night? Of course not. And then in September, ABC pulled the plug on Jimmy Kimmel. You may remember that. After the head of the FCC threatened regulatory action against ABC. So what did Kimmel do wrong? As far as I can tell, what he said accurately was that some Trump supporters were trying to exploit the murder of Charlie Kirk for political purposes. From what I can tell, that's somewhat true. In any event, they pulled the plug on Kimmel. This time, the network gave in after there was enough public protest. Now, a third way to manipulate public opinion is to control what information is out there. And Trump and his administration have been playing games with government databases. The Office of Management and Budget is supposed to have a website that allows you to track how the government's spending your money. Trump pulled the website off the servers, off the internet. Months later, a court ruled that database has to be public, and it got posted back up. The government has pulled down climate assessment reports. Anything that might suggest climate change is real, federal agencies are removing that stuff from their websites. The Defense Secretary, Peter Hegseth, has prohibited journalists from reporting anything about the Defense Department that hasn't been authorized for release. Doesn't matter if it's classified or not. You have to get his blessing for anything you want to report. And then lastly, as one of these techniques that I mentioned, dictators like to make everybody talk about them, like to make themselves the center of attention and to build a kind of cult of personality about who they are. Read Trump's stuff on the internet if you're interested. As far as I can tell, he believes he is the only person who can solve the nation's problems, the only person who can handle our foreign policy, the only person who can end wars in the world, and the only person who can establish world peace. He also, cheap shot, but he likes to have his photo on public buildings. No, you seen these? Do they look at all familiar? Other people have liked to have their photos on public buildings. And this is trivia in the grand scheme of things, and yet there's something strange. Oh, no, that didn't work. Strangely disturbing to me about those. Oh, well. All right, there we go. Okay. A second thing that dictators do is to try to neutralize their political opposition. And that includes trying to clean house within the government. Now, on one level, this happens all the time. We have a political system. The top level people at a lot of federal agencies are appointed for political reasons. Every time a new administration comes in, there is a certain amount of cleaning house that happens. There's nothing un-American about that. We've all been doing it for a long time. But Trump is taking it to a level that I don't think we've ever seen before. He likes to fire people. He has fired the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's fired the Librarian of Congress. He fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics after the Bureau issued a jobs report that wasn't as good as he wanted it to be. He fired the head of the Office of Special Counsel, which protects whistleblowers within the government. He fired the head of the Office of Government Ethics, which manages programs to prevent conflicts of interest. He fired the inspector generals at 17 federal agencies, 6 in the cabinet, and also groups like EPA and the Veterans Administration. An inspector general's job is to identify waste and fraud and abuse within the agency. When Trump fired all those inspector generals, his reason was, this is a quote, he was changing priorities. So apparently it is no longer a priority to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse within government agencies. He's also fired Democrats on a whole number of big federal agencies. Now, there's a Supreme Court decision that goes back to the 1930s that says a president can only fire somebody on one of those agencies, quote, for cause. Trump didn't give any cause. He's just fired the Democrats on a whole bunch of those agencies. Several federal courts have said he can't do it, but the Supreme Court allowed the firings to remain in place while the legal challenges go forward. The one example where the Supreme Court actually drew a line was when Trump tried to fire Lisa Cook from the Federal Reserve Board. Federal law treats the Federal Reserve as a lot more independent than a typical agency like the FTC. And the Supreme Court said she left Cook in place. That firing hasn't gone ahead. Trump, of course, has appealed, and there's going to be argument on his attempt to fire Lisa Cook at the beginning of the year. Now, it's where this is. I was shocked when I found out this one. It's worth mentioning, his Justice Department sued every federal judge in Maryland. Why would they do that, you might ask? Because the judges in Maryland had adopted a procedural order that said if somebody who's being deported raises a legal argument, we will temporarily halt the deportation proceedings. You know, it sort of sounds like due process to me. But Pam Bondi and the Justice Department sued every one of those federal judges. The case was dismissed by a judge who was actually appointed by Trump the last time around, who called it an unprecedented attempt to intimidate the judiciary. Of course, Trump has appealed from that order. Now, a second strategy that dictators do to try to control the opposition is to put the opposition in jail. So far, I mean, I suppose we should all heave a sigh of relief. He hasn't tried to put Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or Nancy Pelosi in jail yet, but he has gone after a couple of people. James Comey, former head of the FBI. Trump blames Comey. As far as I can tell, this vendetta is because back when Comey was running the FBI, it investigated Russian interference with the 2016 election, which seems like ancient history at this point. But nevertheless, he's got Comey in his sights. He demanded that the Justice Department indict him now. All caps, lots of exclamation points. Career prosecutors at the Justice Department produced a memo saying there was absolutely no basis for charging Comey, no probable cause that he committed a crime. The head prosecutor in Virginia refused to indict Comey, so Trump got rid of him. So who's the new U.S. attorney in Virginia? Lindsay Halligan. She's an insurance lawyer. She's never prosecuted a case. Her only claim to fame is that she represented Trump in various earlier litigation. He made her the U.S. attorney, and she indicted Comey. The other target, Letitia James, attorney general in New York. What'd she do wrong? She filed a suit, a fraud suit in New York against Trump and his businesses, and a court ordered them to pay $450 million in damages. Trump demanded that the Justice Department indict her. Lindsay Halligan bravely stepped in and immediately indicted James. So Comey and James have moved to dismiss, claiming with decent evidence that this is all politically motivated. They've also claimed that Halligan wasn't appointed properly, and you might have read just in the last day or two, a judge questioned whether Halligan had followed the grand jury rules appropriately when she indicted Comey. So we'll see what happens. Now, a third time-honored tactic, if you're a dictator, is to rig elections. Now, this one's a little more complicated because rigging elections on one level is an American tradition. What does the Constitution say about, and I'm talking now about the drawing district boundaries in an attempt to control, to influence the outcome, to make it more likely your party will win. So what does the Constitution say about the boundaries? That's the current map in Massachusetts, by the way. The Constitution basically leaves district boundaries to the states. There's only a few important ground rules. The Supreme Court ruled back in the 60s that it adopted the principle of one person, one vote. So each of those districts has to have roughly the same number of people. That's a rule. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 prevents a state from trying to draw the boundaries in a way that minimizes the political power of a racial minority. That used to matter. The current Supreme Court doesn't seem to think that the Voting Rights Act matters any longer. But population size and race are issues, are legitimate issues that courts have used to second guess how states draw boundaries. But beyond that, states have been playing games with the boundaries since the very beginning. Now, I mean, what's sort of amusing here, I think, is the double standard. Trump and his supporters are quite happy when a state like Texas redoes the boundaries to try to make sure there are more Republicans elected. But when California does the same thing to try to make sure there are more Democrats elected, the Justice Department files a lawsuit. Can't have that. Now, the ultimate way to undermine a democracy is to outlaw the political opponents, to get rid of the other parties. As far as I know, somebody stop me if I missed something, but as far as I know, Trump hasn't actually said that he's planning to outlaw the Democratic Party. We'll see. He has outlawed something called Antifa. You might have heard of that. He issued an order that something called Antifa, A-N-T-I-F-A, anti-fascist is a domestic terrorist organization that calls for the overthrow of the government. There are fringe groups that use that label and have engaged in some political violence. On the other hand, there's no legal support for the idea that Trump has the power to identify domestic terrorist organizations. It's a category he made up. There's another interesting thing about his attempt to outlaw Antifa. It doesn't really exist. It's not an organization. It's a collection of groups. But anyway, that's out there. Republicans and Fox News likes to suggest that any time there's a political protest about something, it's really the Antifa folks behind it. But I don't know what to make of that. The thing that's really scary to me is a presidential memorandum he signed in September. It's targeting what he calls domestic terrorism and organized political violence. So what does it do? It starts by listing some examples of political violence in the country in the last few years. The murder of Charlie Kirk, terrible thing. The attempted assassination of Trump during the election, terrible thing. There was a shooting at one of the ICE facilities in Dallas. Other ICE agents have been attacked from time to time in protests. And then he identifies a sort of catch-all of anti-police riots without never really identifying what they are. Now, so he lists a few bad things that have happened, but then what does he do? He jumps to the conclusion that there is an organized campaign in this country to overthrow the U.S. government. What is it motivated by? Direct quote. It's motivated by anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-Christianity, extremism on immigration, race, and gender, and hostility toward those who hold traditional American views on family, religion, and morality. Now, those things I just mentioned apply to an awful lot of mainstream liberal organizations in this country. Trump set up a task force to identify the groups that subscribe to those dangerous values and do something about them. Now, it's really too soon to know whether this is just political rhetoric or whether he's actually laying the foundation to try to silence not just the crazies like Antifa, but mainstream liberal organizations. You know in your heart he wants to. Will he actually, I shouldn't say that, but I think he wants to, but will he actually have the courage to try to do it? I don't know. Okay, how else do you know when you're living in a dictatorship? Well, when the individual leader and not the legislature makes the laws. Now, how do you apply that proposition to what American presidents can do? So, sorry, a little detour on the Constitution. Constitution isn't all that specific about what presidents can do. It does say that the executive power is vested in a president. It doesn't define executive power, but it does identify some of the things that presidents are allowed to do. And if the slide would work, I would show you. There we are. Constitution says the president gets to be the commander in chief. The president has the power to grant pardons. The president is required every year to report to Congress on the State of the Union. And the president has the power to make treaties and appoint, like justices of the Supreme Court, ambassadors, other officers of the government. That on that last one, though, he can appoint them, but the Senate has to approve them. And then there's one last thing that the Constitution says in Section 3. The president is required to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. Now, the Constitution doesn't say a whole lot more than that. And the men who drafted the Constitution never expected a president to do very much. They had a very different idea of what government was going to look like, and the president was to help enforce the laws, but Congress was to make them, and their vision of a president was light years from where we are today. And it's not just Trump. I mean, the power of the president, and this is a whole subject I could do lectures on. The powers of the president have been growing and growing for decades. But again, Trump has taken it to a new level, and the main way he's tried to do it is to use the concept of an emergency. That an emergency allows him to do things that otherwise a president might not otherwise be allowed to do. I couldn't count how many emergencies he's identified. There are websites that will tell you if you're interested. But here's a few of them. There's a national emergency because of immigration. I've quoted some of the key language there. I won't read it all to you, but basically because illegal immigration presents an emergency, he has put the Defense Department and the Homeland Security people in charge of securing the border with Mexico. There's a national emergency involving energy prices. We don't have enough energy and it costs too much. He has claimed that is a national emergency that gives him the power to do things he couldn't otherwise do. And he's used that power to suspend environmental regulations, to kill wind power projects, and to encourage mining and drilling on federal property. The one that's been in the news the most is these emergencies that allow him to play games with tariffs. So again, we need a little background on, who gets to do tariffs. The Constitution says Congress has the power to impose a tariff. For a long time in American history, one of the main political issues was, will Congress raise or lower the tariff? But then after the oil crisis in the 1970s, you remember the first Arab oil embargo? After that, Congress passed a law that gave the president the power to regulate international commerce, including tariffs, during a national emergency. How did they define emergency? I've quoted the language. An unusual and extraordinary threat originating from somewhere outside the country. So, Trump, those are the ground rules. What has he done? He declared that the importation of fentanyl in this country presents a national emergency. The stuff is supposedly coming from Mexico, Canada, and China, and therefore he can deal with the emergency by imposing tariffs on anything those countries send to us. If that sounds like a leap to you a little bit, think it might be. I mean, fentanyl is a terrible thing, but how you go from the fentanyl and opioid epidemic to imports of maple syrup from Canada, I am not sure. Then, what the other emergency is to say that the national trade deficit, Americans buy much more stuff than they sell to the rest of the world. We import a whole lot more than we export. He has declared that those trade deficits are a national emergency that threaten the survival of the country, practically. Now, the United States has had trade deficits since the 1970s, every year, and they got worse when Trump was president the first time. Nevertheless, claiming that the deficits represent an emergency, he has imposed tariffs on goods from 90 different countries. And he's been playing around with the levels. Almost every day a level goes up or a level goes down. There have been lots of legal challenges to those. A number of courts have ruled that he doesn't have the power to do what he's doing with the tariffs. The Supreme Court has allowed the tariffs to stay in place while the cases wind their way up to the court for final decision. They did have an oral argument at the Supreme Court a couple of weeks ago, and it sounds like even some of the conservative justices were a little skeptical that his emergencies exist and allow him to do what he's doing. We probably won't get a decision until next spring, so we'll see. Now, one thing that presidents are definitely authorized to do is to grant pardons. But what has he done with that? Well, partly, and the internet is an amazing thing. There is a website that lists every single person he has pardoned and what they were guilty of. It's fascinating reading. So, like a lot of presidents, he's pardoned people who gave money to his campaign. He's pardoned disgraced, crooked politicians from his own party. That stuff's, presidents do that. That's not dramatic. What isn't is he pardoned everybody who invaded the Capitol on January 6th. That was an armed insurrection trying to overthrow the duly elected, the results of an election. What really happened. Trump wanted to lead the charge on the Capitol. The only reason he didn't is that the Supreme Court, the Secret Service wouldn't let him. They drove him back to the White House. He tried to grab the wheel in the limo. They wouldn't let him. But he's pardoned them all. Now, do I need any other evidence as to how he feels about democracy than that? Really? Now, ultimately, as I mentioned, perhaps the most effective way, or what truly backs up a dictator's authority, is the people with guns. Again, Trump has been using claims of an emergency to send people with guns into the streets to intimidate folks. Is he going to Republican-controlled cities? No. He's going to Democratic-controlled cities. In June, he sent 2,000 members of the California National Guard to Los Angeles. There had been a few protests about the deportation activity of ICE. There was a little bit of violence at some of them, but he claimed that the protests were a rebellion against the authority of the United States itself. In August, he sent the National Guard to Washington, supposedly because of crime. Crime statistics are getting better and better in Washington, but that doesn't really matter, as it turns out. He sent the National Guard to Portland because of protests at the facility where ICE is rounding people up and deporting them. And then in October, he sent the National Guard to Chicago. None of the public officials involved here, none of the mayors of those cities, none of the governors of those states asked him for help. In fact, they all filed lawsuits challenging what he was doing. Again, so we have to go back to the Constitution. Can he do this? What are the rules? The Constitution assumed that each state would have a militia. Okay, today the word militia is now outdated. We call them the National Guard, but it's the same thing. So the Constitution assumed that each state would have a National Guard, and the Constitution says that in certain emergencies, Congress can call up a National Guard and enlist it to help out either to enforce the law or to repel an invasion. And if the Congress does call up a militia, then the president gets to be the commander-in-chief of that militia. Congress has then also passed two other laws that are kind of relevant here. One says that the president can call up a militia if there's a danger of rebellion to the authority of the government itself, or if he's unable with the regular forces of the government, like the army, if he's unable to enforce the law. So that's pretty big problems. A rebellion like the Civil War, or a complete breakdown of law and order. And Congress also passed a law that it's actually illegal to use the army to keep order and to execute the law unless the Constitution or federal law specifically says you can do it. It has a very old-fashioned name, the Posse Comitatus Act. So several federal courts have said he can't do what he's done with calling up the National Guard. And why? Because the protests about ICE deporting activity isn't a rebellion against the United States itself. It's just a protest against the policy. The courts have also ruled that these protests haven't really interfered with ICE hardly at all. They get to keep on arresting people and deporting people. The system is still functioning just fine despite the protests. And one judge has ruled that using the National Guard in LA violated that Posse Comitatus Act. Now, naturally, Trump has appealed every one of those orders as well. Okay, so that's my attempt to kind of run through some of the scary things he's been doing. What's going to happen next? Well, hold on. Will the Republican leaders in Congress locate their backbones and actually decide to say no to him? I don't know. Personally, that seems unlikely, and I don't pretend to understand this obsession with Jeffrey Epstein, but there's something about the Epstein files that has got some ordinary rank and file Republicans upset and willing to cross him. It'll be interesting to see where that goes next. I don't know. Will the Democratic Party manage to bounce back and regain control of Congress a year from now at the next election? The recent election might give Democrats some reason to hope, but I don't know. I don't pretend to be able to predict the future, except to say this: an awful lot of what happens next is going to involve those people. How many times in this talk today have I said, courts have ruled against Trump and he has appealed? I've said that at least 10 or 12 times because it's happened over and over and over. And all those cases are working their way up to those folks. Now, up till now, they've generally allowed him to keep doing what he's doing while the cases are pending, except, as I said, for like Lisa Cook at the Federal Reserve. But at some point, they're going to have to actually rule on the merits. What are they going to do? There's been a conservative majority on the Supreme Court for 50 years. There was a time when conservative justices, back in the 70s and the 80s, when conservative justices were quite happy to tell the other branches of government what to do and to draw lines and to say, nope, the president violated the law in this way, or the Congress exceeded its power under the Constitution in that way. Conservative Supreme Courts used to draw lines. Will this group do that? I don't know. It's going to be, I don't know. So there are a few scenarios here. Will the courts say no to Trump? And if they do, will he give in? I wouldn't be betting on that one. Will they throw in the towel and tell him he can do whatever he wants? Maybe. But isn't the worst case, though, right? The worst case is they tell him he can't do what he's doing, and he says, I don't care because I don't have to obey you. Then we're in serious trouble, right? If that happens, if he thumbs his nose at those people, then we're going to really have to find out whether the American people are willing to stand up and say enough is enough. Now, it was encouraging to me how many people showed up last month for public protests. And beside the sheer numbers, which was marvelous, one of the best things about it was peaceful. Because let's face it, Trump and when they send the National Guard into the streets, they want trouble, right? They want protests. They want people to throw things. They want the troops to be attacked because it's an excuse to send out more troops. They want disorder. Peaceful protests, they have much more trouble dealing with. The civil rights movement figured this out, and years ago, and the American people are going to have to figure it out too if things get worse. And so I'm going to close with this. I don't have, I can't even see what time it is, but it's time to close. So here's my new political hero. I'm wearing my Frogs Against Fascism t-shirt because, let's face it, that guy is a hero. That guy, I mean, there hasn't been much in the news that has made me smile for the last number of months, but that photo makes me smile because not only is it, speaking the truth to power and standing up for what's right, but doing it in a way that makes it a lot harder for them to fight back. Right? That's right. So you can there are all sorts of them available online, and I've got mine. And somebody asked me if I would end, if I would end this talk with hope. And frankly, I don't know how to do that because I don't know what's going to happen. These are scary times, but maybe at least we'll hold on to that. Okay, I'm ending I'm tired. That's it. That's enough. If you have any questions, please let me know. But thank you for listening.
You're beautiful. Okay, we have our microphone men. Hands?
Okay, Frank, that was brilliant. Thank you. So well done. My question is about the Insurrection Act, which is obsessing me lately, because I think given Trump's obvious penchant for declaring emergencies, which don't exist, and for wanting to deal with those emergencies either through economic bullying, mob-like shakedowns, or imposing military presence against citizens who have done nothing. I'm concerned that if the Insurrection Act is not really tightened up, and there are bills in the Senate and the House that have been introduced. Jack Reed from Rhode Island is the senator, and there's a Pennsylvania House member who's introduced the same bill, but they're sitting there. They're not going anywhere. And my assessment is that if the Insurrection Act is not really tightened up, like yesterday, this is really dangerous because Trump could use that to flood the cities that he doesn't like during the midterms. They could seize voting machines. They could do all kinds of things other than the way they're playing with trying to pressure states. And I just wonder if you think that's alarmist or if you think there's anything real there.
I'm seriously alarmed. I would say that the chances of this Congress bailing us out are zero, right? They won't. So any improvement of the Insurrection Act is not going to be happening on the watch of the current folks down in Washington. No, I think the scary things that you just mentioned could easily happen. Sure. I'm sorry. I'm not going to. I don't have any good answer to that one. I'm sorry. Other than public protests if it gets too bad and witnessing at the elections next fall, all kinds of things could go really south between now and next November. I agree with you. I'm sorry. I have no good answer to that one.
First of all, we want to thank you. That was the most put together overall presentation of what Trump is doing to this country. And there are people out there who say, okay, what can I do about it? Well, other than voting, what else can they do about it?
Well, I wish that would go backwards, but it won't. Oh, there we are. They can do that if necessary. I'm much better at describing what's happening than I am at coming up with what to do about it. It's just a character defect of mine. So I am perhaps not. I know there are people in here who are much more active in the right kind of groups to help us anticipate what may happen and figure out how to head it off. I'm sadly not one of those people, but I'm glad if what I described today was a helpful way of organizing it all. But I think that's a subject for another day and some of the other groups that Brooksby has, and other groups in the community. But we do have to be prepared, right? Because, but that's, I love the poster in the lower left there. I don't know how many of you can read it. If you're not angry, you're not paying attention. I think that's a really good one. Anyway.
Frank,
You quite rightly cited numerous cases that are going to be appealed. I was just wondering, your perspective as a lawyer, among all those appeals, do you think there's one that's more likely to be shut down than others?
Actually, that's a hard one to bet on because, I mean, everyone that I mentioned, it seems pretty clear to me that the emergency doesn't exist. The Alien Enemies Act doesn't apply because we haven't been invaded. I mean, all the different things that I mentioned, that he fired people without giving a reason, and the Supreme Court has said you can't do that. I mean, I could make a good case at the Supreme Court for every one of the things that I said he's done wrong. Do I think any of those arguments have a better chance of succeeding? I mean, it sounds like they're skeptical about the tariffs, so maybe that's a place to start. But that's the first real argument on the merits that they've had so far. So the answer is I really don't know. I'm not doing a good job with your questions today. I apologize. I keep saying I don't know, but
well, Frank,
sorry.
Frank, thank you very much. I'm going to give you an easy question, but it's one I'm wondering about. I know Trump tries to take, the spotlight off of the Epstein files and different things. And what's scaring me is our flotilla going down to apparently make war against Venezuela. And these sorties and our most advanced bombers, what possibility and what reason could he actually start the bombing? I know we need Congress to agree for us to go to war. What's your analysis of what could happen?
Well,
thank you.
Sure. The courts and the law give the president an awful lot of discretion in foreign policy and to send troops to deal with emergencies. Now, after Vietnam, Congress passed the War Powers Act, which set limits that the president can send troops without a declaration of war for a certain period of time, but then after that, they have to come home unless Congress declares war. He could bomb the heck out of Venezuela and get away with it for a while before anything would happen. And he might accomplish what he wants to do. And I don't even know that that's illegal. I mean, it would be wrong on a number of levels, in my view, but the law might allow him to do that because presidents get a lot of discretion to deal with foreign policy threats. And that would not be one where I'd bet the Supreme Court would draw a line. So there are some rules there, but he could probably do some serious damage in Venezuela before anybody could tell him no. I guess we'll find out.
Go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you for your summation of all the things that are going wrong. One of my questions is, Trump is too dumb and he's got the attention span of a fruit fly. So I'm just wondering who is really running this plot.
I've read a pretty interesting book about his first administration. And from what I could tell of that, nobody tells him what to do. He doesn't listen to anybody. He doesn't absorb new information. He has very firm ideas and he acts on them and nobody can talk him out of things. And so I'm not sure there's any, I'm not going to get into characterizing his personality, but I think he's making those decisions himself with limited input from members of the family and some of his close advisors like that Miller fellow. And but it was true in his first administration, but it seems really true now. The people close to him will say whatever he wants to hear, right? He's not getting fed contrary information very much. And so I don't know how, beyond that, It will be fascinating when the books start coming out about the second administration. It will be fascinating reading if we're still here.
Sure.